Hey, legal rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Patrick Pallas, outgoing president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents, who spent the past year turning a set of shared professional values in the rule of law into ABA Resolution 400, passed unanimously by the House of Delegates without a single nay or abstention. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin. I'm thrilled today to have on my good old buddy, friend for many years, Patrick Pallas. If you don't know of him, he is the owner of Pallas Law in Tacoma, Washington, for many, many years doing workers' compensation, personal injury. And for the past year, we're kind of at a full circle moment today. He has been the president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents. And there's a lot of great work that he's done over the past year during his tenure as president, and we'll be talking about that. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Tom, I'm good. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I listen to this podcast. I know who you bring to this stage, and it's a big deal. Thank you for letting me come.
It's my pleasure, as always, Patrick. We get to check in with each other almost weekly and see what we're up to. And so to be able to record it and share it with the world is a nice change of pace. But like the past year, I remember now, it was about a year ago when we met up in Astoria, which you could actually see out your back window there,
right,
in Oregon, to organize the launch of your presidency as president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents. It's been a year. How's it gone?
Well, that was a really interesting time because, I was a Washington State Bar president. Everybody who's on my council for the National Conference of Bar Presidents are past bar presidents. A lot of them state bar presidents, some of them affiliates like or a national bar. And we came together to plan an entire year. Like, what are the most important things that have to happen in this profession? How can we as presidents across the country come together and do the really important work? And, for those of you that are paying any attention to the news, you know that there are many fronts where lawyers, the law, the courts are being challenged. It's a frontal assault. And so we sat down and said, how do we prioritize what it is that we need to do as bar presidents? And how can we get that done? Now, Tom, I will take a step here because there's a lot of thought that goes into this. But we also wanted to merge technology into the thought process with that idea that technology, AI, plus thought leadership equals something greater than we could create as just leaders or thought leaders alone. And so one of the ideas that I had was, do you suppose we could leverage AI as a thought partner and speed the process in which you take 14 people into a room and say, plan out a year's full of priorities and action items and steps and get this done, right? All right. So for those of you listening, maybe you see where I'm going. I call up Tom on LawDroid and I said, is it possible to create a chatbot, an AI tool designed for strategic planning that we can bring to this 3-day retreat? Now, for those of you who've done strategic planning in your firm or your corporation, or maybe in your, for us, we do it a lot for bars, that you have frequently a moderator or somebody to help you think, or you bring an outside consultant and you spend days and you collect ideas and you sit around in small groups and you discuss this. Or if this is your firm, then you have the partners around. Everyone has different ideas. How do we do this? Different skill sets. It's hard. It's hard. It's like, coming up with these grand ideas and then trying to figure out the time frame to do them. For those of you that are fans of rocks or from the book Traction or OKRs, objectives with key results, building metrics to decide how to have these strategic plans and how to create them and know when you're achieving the goals, this is a lot of work. So, Tom, I won't get into the nuts and bolts a lot here, but needless to say, instead of having 3 days of 8 hours a day and just going and thinking and debating, in about 3 hours, we created a year's worth of work for something like 10 different committees who created 5 objectives or goals or rocks apiece, created then the action items for each one of those objectives, and then a timeline by which to complete them. And we had your National Council of Bar President's strategic planning chatbot to act as a thought partner to help us think better, organize better, create timelines, and then eventually create a Google Sheet that we all shared and then worked from for the entire year. And maybe that's where it gets interesting, Tom.
I appreciate that, Patrick, but I have to say that, it's always great to work with someone who has a vision of where it's going. I can't take the credit for all of that because you had a very distinct vision of what you wanted the tool to do, and a lot of content and a lot of steps that I worked into this tool. So with that, I think there's always a great partnership between people that have the expertise and people that build, and when that comes together, it's a wonderful thing. What you wanted to accomplish was not just like lofty goals, but tying it to, concrete steps to take to achieve those goals and even timelines and things like that. Did it work?
I have to tell you that we're now a whole year later, and I gave my final speech to the National Council of Bar Presidents, which is, hundreds of bar presidents from across the country. And we also did a podcast, which, by the way, was one of the strategic goals, called Leading the Bar Podcast. And we did a full show on where we've been and what we've done and what's going to happen in the future. So may I just rattle through some of the goals and then the outcomes?
Yeah, sure. Let's hear it.
So that was one of them. It's like, if we are going to create a direction or policy or share technology, share leadership wisdom, bring the voices of some of the most impressive bar presidents and bar leaders and achievers in the country together, how do we do that? Well, we did that just like you've done on this podcast manifesto. We created a podcast. That was one of the goals. We should create a podcast to do this. And we created the Leading the Bar podcast. We did 22 shows in our first year. And we are now 5 shows into the second year. My thanks to our supporter, our partner, Legal Talk Network, who, after the show was so successful, we doubled down and became doing it in video, doing more shows. We get a chance to have more money, more opportunity, greater visibility. And that's been amazing. In the first year, we had something like 9,000 downloads. But that's not the streaming. That's just people actually had downloads, right? So it's probably twice that. We're probably in that 15 to 18,000 people hearing. And, for a national bar full of bar leaders, it maybe is 500 bar presidents across the country. We know there's a lot more people learning about the law and the direction the law is heading, the things that we're doing, than are just listening to the podcast as presidents. And I love that. Maybe you find that on your viewership. Like, is it just legal tech lawyers listening to your podcast? I doubt it. It's probably a broad range of people who find this really an interesting topic. And so we found the same. And we've talked to leaders from the very top of the food chain, top of the ABA, people, historical figures, people who are continuing to build out the practice of law and the profession, people in technology. We had Ed Walters on, from Fast Case, VLEX, and now Clio. It's really been an interesting thing building out this podcast. That was part of the strategic plan. We wanted to create a fund, right? A legacy fund. Mm-hmm. So we invited all presidents to give money to part of this legacy fund to build out our abilities to create projects. Done. Thousands of dollars. Many people are involved, which has been really amazing to do that. we wanted to survey our people. So we created a survey. It was one of the rocks. Can we survey everybody, get better feedback about the organization, about bar presidents, what they want to do, how they want to lead, what their problems are? Survey's out. It's gone out, and we have something like 20% of leaders across the country. We filled it out in the first week. Diversity was important to us, making sure that our leadership represented the voices from many walks of life, people that can represent different cities, different life experiences, different opportunities, different areas of law. We created this diversity scholars program. We didn't start that this year, but we continue to grow it out. And, happy to say that we have, more than a dozen young lawyer leaders who are now coming up through the ranks through the National Conference of Bar Presidents. We get out 5 different sets of national awards and recognize people for their achievements. We celebrated our 75th anniversary as bar president. It's been really amazing. But maybe the crowning glory for me is the pledge.
Well, let me ask you about that, because for those that aren't as familiar with the National Conference of Bar Presidents, like each bar association has a bar president in the different states, and they're actively doing that. And this is kind of like a meta layer, so to speak, like a organizing principle on top of that, which part of it, I would imagine, is moral leadership, principled leadership. And so the pledge is part of that. And if you could share with everyone what the pledge is.
Yeah, happy to. And yeah, you're right about kind of the org structure. Many people get to be leaders in their bar, whether it's a local bar or affinity bar or a state bar. And when you're done with that presidency, we open up the doors and say there's more leadership to be done at the national level. And so the National Council of Bar Presidents is that organization of all bar presidents. And certainly our members are incoming presidents and presidents, because we do a ton of conferences and training and helping people network. But the organization, officers, president, council are all past presidents, right? We're the leadership. And ideally, the wisdom of leadership that we bring to help build leadership across the country. So that's the short version of what the National Conference of Bar Presidents is. So one of the things that we did, that was one of our rocks or our goals or policy ideas, was to create a document that unified the entire profession with a set of principles that everyone can stand by. And you may think, really, is there a set of principles that 1.3 million lawyers across the country stand by, that 500 bar presidents would stand by? Well, we did ask that same question, and I think my answer was clearly, yeah, there really are. There are really important things that we need to identify that are the core functions, the core values of our entire profession, from north to south, east to west, across the country. And as our profession is being assaulted, attacked by those who don't want to see the rule of law succeed, or detractors who don't want to see leadership in lawyers. I mean, there's that old famous quote from Shakespeare, right? First we kill the lawyers. It's the idea that there's a front line of protecting the rule of law and democracy, and it's lawyers. And if you get rid of them, then you no longer have a democracy, you no longer have a court system, you no longer have protectors of the Constitution. So we said, let's put together these basic shared principles, shared values. And I'll read them to you, because this was an interesting bit of work to bring this up, but we did create these values. We created then a document that encompassed these values, and that document's called the Pledge. And the Pledge was an opportunity for every lawyer across this country to raise their hand and say, these are my values. I pledge to protect and defend these values as part of this profession. And we sent this pledge out across the country. And we asked bar presidents and individual leaders and then entire bars to sign it. And I'll tell you what some of the values were, because I think they're really important values. Upholding the law, the rule of law, and the Constitution. Preserving the independence of the legal profession. Preserving the independence of the judiciary. Respecting our courts and the legal process. Promoting public trust in both lawyers and the courts and the system. Ensuring access to justice for all. And then some of the things that are really obvious that we all stand behind every day, which is advancing professional excellence and ethical leadership. And then this was an important one, fostering unity, speaking from one voice. And I want to emphasize those principles are the same ones that every one of us lawyers take when we stand up and give our oath to become lawyers. And they're also contained in the preamble to our rules of professional conduct, both the model rules and just about every single state across this country. So we consolidate them into a single document and ask everyone to sign. The beauty of this, Tom, is, and you were there when we put these ideas together, is that we did create the document. We did send it out across the country. Me and others at the national conference spoke at just about every state bar convention and regional conference and did podcasts and wrote articles for bar journals and reviews. And hundreds of bar presidents signed, dozens and dozens of bars, mandatory bars, voluntary bars, right? State bars, affinity bars, local bars signed off, big and small, across the country. And we got so much support of these principles across the country. In fact, there was really no one opposing it, no one fighting us for it. There were states who were afraid that standing up for the rule of law might, anger the political powers that be in their state, their governor or their attorney general, whatever. So there were some states, I think, who took a back seat. They supported it. They just couldn't do it outwardly. But the majority of states and bars across this country had something to say about the pledge and joined. In fact, we got so much support that we turned it into a resolution. And for those of you who are, part of the American Bar Association, you know what that is. Resolutions are where the entire ABA House of Delegates, which is about 600 representatives across the country, get together twice a year. And they debate resolutions. If it's Congress, it'd be a bill. The ABA, it's a resolution. And they debate resolutions to either affirm and become national policy or to reject. The pledge became an ABA resolution, Resolution 400. And we brought it to the floor of the House. And I had one of the greatest pleasures of my life, frankly, of addressing the entire House of Delegates with, I guess, the uniting idea that we all, as a country, need to stand behind these principles of protecting the rule of law and the Constitution and the importance of the independence of the profession and the judiciary and promoting public trust in it. And you know what, Tom? After we were done with that discussion, there was a vote, and it was unanimously accepted across the delegates of this entire country, in every state and everyone who was there. There was not a single abstention. There was not a single nay coming across the floor of the House of Delegates. And when the gavel came down and it was announced that it was passed, it was honestly one of the happiest days of my life, and certainly a big day for the National Conference of Bar Presidents. And the bar that sponsored it was the Washington State Bar Association. And I think they were firmly behind the principles, but maybe you were a little reluctant because they'd never taken a resolution up before the national body before, and they weren't sure exactly what that looked like or how to get there. But we did it, and we got there, and we talked to people far and wide, and it was a big day. And the takeaway is that now that there is this understanding across the country, the ABA stands behind these things. I mean, there shouldn't have been any issue about it. Now it's done. Now it's a resolution that's passed.
What an amazing accomplishment, Patrick. And I mean, to work for the entire year to move it forward and it culminating in the American Bar Association passing that as a resolution is fantastic. And you're right. Like, I completely agree with you that these are things that we all, swear an oath to when we become lawyers. And it's shocking in a way that there might be some that would be reluctant to affirm those principles that we already claim to stand for. Those things are what differentiate what we are as legal professionals from any business person who wants to just to make money from practicing law. There are certain things that we need to stand behind, and I think stand behind more than we have in the past, because there's room for improvement for sure with how we practice.
Well, one of the lessons I've taken away from this, speaking across the country to bar conferences, bar presidents, is there are some people in this country who would like to make the rule of law political. somehow the rule of law is political to them. And I don't understand why you would want to take that position. Anybody would. A politician, I think, maybe they think there's some value to get out of that because if you can control lawyers or take away their ability to be independent or control the courts, then, that's a threat to you. And so you have to say the rule of law is bad. It's political. It's debatable. And it's not. It's something we've had in this country for 250 years, starting with the Declaration of Independence. And that's one of those things we're celebrating this year, right? The 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And one of the shocking things about the Declaration of Independence, if you read it, is that there is a list of complaints, right, against the king. When we did some of our conference about this and read some of those complaints back in the day, 20 years ago, they sound familiar. There's some of the same things that are going on today. And it's the rule of law, protecting our Constitution, independent judiciary, that protect and defend us from falling all the way back to 250 years ago with those same complaints. Again, it is the one thing that stands clear over history is this rule of law. And there's nothing partisan or political about it. And I don't care who says or wants to challenge the rule of law. I'm going to stand behind it because that's who we are as lawyers, and that's our oath to do that.
There's a thread that I'd like to explore here, which is that it's interesting that on the one hand, AI was able to act as a partner in contributing to the planning that led to this year, and the pinnacle of it being, the pledge being accepted throughout the country through the American Bar Association's resolution. Yet at the same time, it's not just, political threats to the rule of law, but it's also technological potential threats to the rule of law. And so I'd like to turn to that part of it because on the one hand, AI helped here, but on the other hand, there's been an ongoing debate about different ways that we as legal professionals are being impacted by AI, and not just us, our clients, the ones that are more important, the ones that need the help, how they are impacted by it, and how it's changing things and maybe not for the better. So I'd really like to hear your insight as, the president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents and just bar presidents generally, like what is the tension there that you all see with AI, and can it help or does it hurt, or how should we think about it?
Let me bridge that question this way. So we were talking about using a AI chatbot for strategic planning to plan our direction for the national conference. And we used our chatbot as a thought partner to build something additional than we were thinking of as bar leaders or opinion leaders. How do we combine the two to leverage our thoughts and our desire to do better things for the profession and the country with AI's ability to think and pull in databases and organize our thoughts and put them on timelines? And it was that combination that was important. If we had simply asked the chatbot, create a strategic plan for us, it would have. It would not have been the best plan. It wouldn't have been the thing that we executed. It probably wouldn't have been the thing we would be proud of like we are. It's that combination of thought leadership. We're all lawyers, so I'm going to add in lawyer skills there, plus AI that got us to where we are. Those two things created the pledge, but mostly it was the thought leadership there, right? So that maybe is the bridge to the question where you're getting at about, the use of AI in the legal profession and the importance of AI leadership. And we have a lot of discussions about this at the National Council of Bar Presidents. What does ethical AI leadership look like? What does this profession look like in the coming years? And how do we as bar leaders help build those steps so that every lawyer across this country and every bar leader across this country are rowing in the same direction to do the right work without falling afoul of the downsides of technology, right? I think you know all about what I'm talking about. You're right in the middle of some of these things, and I know you've spoken internationally on some of these topics. But let me just say this: AI leadership is a really important topic, and we at the National Conference of Bar Presidents have been looking for ways to convey the direction of the profession. And this is a much longer conversation, Tom, but if I can just kind of rattle off some higher level ideas.
Sure.
It was only a couple of years ago that people were saying, is this going to take over the legal profession? And you see a study that shows all the things that AI can replace of lawyers. Is there anything left for us? Are we going to be wiped out as lawyers? Are we going to have a job? This was the big, hype going on there for a while. And then I heard the next stage, which was, no, AI is not going to wipe us out. But if you're a lawyer who's not using AI, then a lawyer who's using AI may take your job or do it so much better you're not needed anymore. And that seemed to be the next phase. I think we've advanced beyond both those ideas. And now the question is, what does that partnership look like? Where are we headed as a profession of lawyers with AI? How does it fit into our future? There was a great article by Jordan Furlong, who I had the pleasure of speaking side by side on a panel at an IELTS event recently. And it was always illuminating to talk with Jordan and share ideas. But he expressed something that I thought was really nicely put. He simply identified that the role of lawyers fits into these three A's: advocate, advice, and accompany. And the concept behind this is one that's a broader concept that we're talking about as bar presidents, which is, lawyers have this pyramid of the highest tasks to the lowest bottom, anybody can do them, low skill tasks. And it used to be when we did discovery, for example, in a big lawsuit, and all the associates would, end up going to the warehouse and thumbing through pages for weeks, months, and years in these cases. That's that low level, or form filling. That's that low level, recreating letters and forms and sending them out, that lowest possible. We don't need lawyers to do that. And yet lawyers have created the billable hour doing such things and live off the billable hour doing such things. I think I can speak with confidence, if I have any ability to look into the future, or even frankly, just stare at the present, that AI is going to replace all of that. AI is going to replace all of that busy low-level work. And so the other side of the equation is what's left for lawyers. So Jordan Furlong would say, well, it's about being human. It's that human component of a lawyer that AI can never replace. And maybe in the simplest terms, for those who are thinking about what this looks like, if you do a jury trial, your AI, ChatGPT, doesn't come to the closing argument. When your client comes into your office and tells their story and needs to connect with somebody, needs to know that someone's going to be their advocate, needs to know that someone is going to listen, AI is not going to do that. When you're writing briefs and you have strategic thoughts and strategic methods to do things, AI is not really going to do that either. But coupled with AI, we can do all those things perhaps better in preparation and ideas and thinking up ways to find solutions, in building out timelines to get things done, or having a thought partner for ideas. But that human side of lawyering is what lawyers are going to look like, I think. That highest level of pyramid is who we're going to be, not the lowest level anymore. So it all goes away. But you see, and I know that some of these things are in your mind too, what does that do to the billable hour? What does that do to associates in middle and small firms? What's the effect then on lawyers in small firms? How do we train our lawyers to be effective at doing things if they never get that training ground anymore because it's all taken away by AI? And does that mean the profession loses money or it grows bigger, right? These are all these discussions that go on, and I'm happy to talk about any of those, Tom, but I just wanted to lay that out so that we have, a foundation on which to pull from.
Yeah, there's all of that. There's definitely, conversations about all of that all the time on LinkedIn, at conferences, just everyone percolating these thoughts that are occurring to all of us about what's at stake. I, for one, teaching law students at Suffolk about generative AI. They have many questions about their future job prospects and whether or not those will be impacted by AI. I know that some recent numbers that Richard Troman's published on his Artificial Lawyer blog seem to suggest that there might be some stagnation in hiring. And the question mark was whether or not that was attributable to AI. The other side of the fence, though, is that, maybe it will decrease the amount of like automatable, low level stuff, as you put it, kind of like just pure thumbing through paperwork kind of stuff. But it would replace that with maybe new associates getting to work at a much higher level more quickly. So that instead of doing this busy work that you didn't really learn that much from anyways in a warehouse, like being stuck there for months, you're not learning a heck of a lot. Of course, all of those associates that are in the warehouse were probably dreaming of like, hey, I wish I could interact with a client, or I wish I could be in court, or I wish I could do something that's more useful than this, and that maybe AI will accelerate that.
Well, one of the more important questions, and I'm going to say even a question that is being answered and needs to be thought about by every lawyer who's practicing law in this country, is what does your model look like? What's your model going to look like? If we just take that leap of faith and say the billable hour is going to be the billable minute because AI is going to solve all of the hourly work that you had to do, and it's now going to be, instant minutes of work. So billable hour isn't really viable. And the ABA in its opinion 512, what's billed has to reflect the time spent. So what does that do for our profession if we're built on the billable hour and now we are solving problems so rapidly that billable hours don't work? Then I think the obvious answer is you have to build on the outcomes, and we become an outcome creator rather than someone who just churns hours to do things anymore. And when that model is introduced, how much has to change the way that we do business? And my fear and even my warning to lawyers across the country as we talk as bar leaders, and as bar leaders are working within our bars to try to move the profession along, right? Help you see where this is going, that we need to start developing a better model for practicing law that is viable and indeed can succeed and thrive. But the biggest threat is, I think, law firms who fail to advance, who fail to recognize things are happening and try to live on the billable hour and try to avoid AI or not use AI at all because they're used to their old way of doing it. And these are the firms that I think are going to fail. They're going to drop out. And what does that do with other firms merging and leaving space in the market, right? We'll quickly come to who's going to be a dominant firm and who those dominant firms are going to be. They're going to have the right model. They're going to fully integrate AI. They're going to do it effectively and efficiently and with leadership. They're going to drop out of the billable hour. And so the firms that don't prepare, I fear for their future. The firms that are now immediately transitioning and pivoting to this new model, which isn't going to be here in 10 years or 5 years, it's here now. And it's happening very, very quickly if they're not paying attention. And I worry for those, and we spend a lot of time trying to help firms make that adjustment if you're on a billable hour model, that adjustment, that pivot has to happen, or you're probably not going to survive.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and it's not the brightest light on this for lawyers that are out there practicing right now. That there is this threat that they have to deal with, but it's the reality of it. Probably the next 5 years or so, there's going to be a big transition to this new way of doing business, and in some ways, it makes me think a lot of technological change around the globe, like cell phones, for example. There was this point where countries that have built out traditional landline systems, they had phones, they had this system in place, and when it came to transitioning to cell phones, okay, well now how do we fit this into our existing system? In some countries in Africa or in China, they skipped ahead. Like they just went to cell phones. Everyone had those, and the cell networks just were something that was native to them. Like that was the native system that they used to access telecommunications, and they leapfrogged all of the intricacies and some of the technological debt of having built out a landline system. And this is what I'm thinking is similar to what's going on right now.
Well, you bring up two really important ideas, right? One is that because of the speed in which this technology is coming into place and is usable, it is going to shake up the old hierarchy of law firms. And there are going to be firms who are unknown, who are going to leapfrog and become very big. There are big firms who are going to be toppled by this, and a whole lot of rearranging in between. It's going to be a race to adaptability. It's going to be a race to productivity. It's going to be a race to producing outcomes. And you said something a minute ago about, sorry for young lawyers or what this does. I was in a panel not too long ago where this idea was kind of discussed, not quite this, but something along the lines of, yeah, the profession's going to collapse, and sorry, young lawyers, your salaries aren't going to be waiting for you, and there's not going to be work waiting out there, and maybe you made the wrong choice coming into the profession. And I absolutely bristled at what I thought was a pessimistic and somewhat ignorant view of our future. I much more hearken it to that old, business model of Blockbuster thinking they had a monopoly on the market of movies and leveraged it, right, with penalties, because they thought they'd get away with that and make the money off penalties turning your video in late because they owned the video monopoly. And then Netflix comes along with streaming. And the interesting thing about it was, of course, that Blockbuster dies. But the more interesting thing about it was that Blockbuster thought it had got close to maximizing the market. And reality was they had a very small piece of what was the eventual market that Netflix expanded by 5x or 8x or something ridiculous. And the market is still expanding today, but Netflix didn't see that because they were stuck on their idea of their monopoly. And I think lawyers are somewhat similar to this. If the current legal market is something like a $500 billion market under the existing practice of law, and if the need for law is so much larger, you look at the access to justice studies and, that see that 80% of the people don't get the legal services they need. And especially in low income, they may have 10 issues they need and they get a lawyer to help them in none of them. Right? And now we have this AI tool that can help expand dramatically everyone's access. Courts are now being flooded with pro se litigants who are doing their own briefs, who are doing their own little research, that are showing up in court acting as lawyers. Maybe not very well, but they're doing it. And that's that latent market that we've all been talking about for a decade. How do we get this latent market? Well, that latent market, I think conservatively it's $1 trillion. And I've heard some people say it's probably $4 trillion. So for lawyers now working at the top of their skill set and leveraging AI tools and thinking about how can we expand the scope of our practice rather than contract it to an individual client. How do we represent more? How do we do more? Easy. We have AI. We have these tools now to do many things at the same time for many people at the same time and work at the top of our pyramid to do that. And so I think for actually future lawyers, it's a very bright time to be here. For law schools, hey, note to law schools, if you're training your young lawyers, your young students on to be a lawyer successful in 2030 and you identify where the market is and then train them to be there when it comes, it's a very bright future for young lawyers and for really all of us as lawyers, but it's coming. I mean, it's here. I'm not even going to say it's coming. It's here. And the question is, how fast can we adapt to truly expand our market, to expand our scope, to utilize these tools, to work the top of our pyramid, because we're not replaceable, but we can leverage all of that lower work we don't need to do ourselves still as part of our practice, right? And build out. Anyway, that's a whole lot of words in a very short period of time. But you know where I'm going with this? I think that as bar leaders, as opinion leaders in law, as AI leaders, and this is a really important direction for us to not walk but run, while we still have the ability to drive the direction of this before it ends up driving us. And it's always a risk, that we step away from the steering wheel of the bus and let somebody else drive it for us, because it's happening if we don't take the wheel.
Well, I of course agree with you, Patrick, and I want to thank you so much for being ahead of it in terms of leading and showing people the direction, showing lawyers the principles that we should still stand for, and thankfully getting people on board. Where do you see this going forward over the next year or two? I guess it's a year, tenure for president. How do you feel about it coming to this point and handing the reins forward?
Well, let me put this in a hierarchy. For the reins for me as president, great. I have it in the hands of the amazing next group of officers and leaders across this country and the National Conference of Bar Presidents. And I have full faith. We're all on the same page. We're all rowing the same direction. We all have the same beliefs. And we get the benefit of having a 10,000-foot view across the country, meeting with lawyers and leaders and seeing their 5,000-foot view, right? And together we are much stronger and capable and able to do this. So I feel very good about that. But there's one other piece that's in there, and maybe that's just the hierarchy, right? How do we prioritize these things we talked about? And I'm going to say, maybe it's obvious, but if we don't stand first for the rule of law and the independence of our profession, then we don't get to talk about AI. We don't get to talk about access to justice. We don't get to talk about scaling and building more successful practices. We simply lose our judicial system. We simply lose our independence. We lose our rules of conduct and fairness. It's as if someone came into the Super Bowl and said, I'm going to change the rules for one team, and so when they score, they get 20 points. But when their team scores, they get 3. If someone comes in and changes our rules, we're no longer going to have a fair game. We're never going to have something again where everyone has a level playing field, where the courts mean something. And so the priority, I think, for this nation as lawyers is to stand up anywhere someone is speaking out against the rule of law. There is not a sense that you can be neutral anymore. Being quiet is not being neutral. Not speaking to protect your profession is not being neutral. In fact, it's the opposite. So for lawyers, speaking out when you see someone bashing the rule of law or claiming it's unfair or that we shouldn't have it or it's political is important for every lawyer to do. When someone is picking on a judge because they don't understand the judicial system or how appeals work or what due process means, it's our opportunity as lawyers to explain that, because this is 250 years of due process, legal process, starting with our Constitution independence. These things have to come first. And then we can luxuriate in things like AI and scope and building practices. Then we can luxuriate in the idea of providing access to justice to those who are underserved, who we have to deliver legal services. And I don't know if this country has ever had to prioritize those things. There are groups who say access to justice is so important. And we've never had to really worry about the rule of law before. This is the first time it's really been under assault, or worry about the independence of our judiciary. But now we have to, and I think as lawyers, we have to pick those priorities and stand up and defend the things that matter first, that are foundational, like we talked about in the pledge. And then, luxuriate, it's like a funny thing, right? There's nothing luxurious about access to justice, but we can't get to access to justice until we protect and defend the rule of law. So I'm hoping what's going to happen as we move forward is that we survive this current time. The rule of law stands strong. Our courts remain independent. This profession remains independent and regulated independently, state by state. There is not a national interference in any of those things. And then we continue to do the good work we do of representing people across the country who need us, of making things fair, of balancing playing fields, of doing the right thing, of being ethical lawyers, of helping people that need our help and businesses who need us to resolve their problems, and do so in a way that is fair and honorable as it's always been. That's my vision for where we're headed as a country of lawyers. But it really does take all of us to stand up and do that, because democracy does not defend itself. The rule of law does not defend itself. The courts cannot defend themselves. And our independence is not going to last unless we stand up to be independent. So it takes our voice, Tom, to do this. And that is really an important message if we are going to have a future as lawyers. And you know what? Maybe AI can help us do that a little bit better.
Well, Patrick, I think that is a grand and worthy vision, and I want to thank you so much for leading the charge in defending it, as well as all of those lawyers who have agreed and signed off on the pledge, the ABA, the National Conference of Bar Presidents, and everyone, because it is so needed. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure, Tom. Thank you, my friend.
Now, for everyone who's watching, for them to learn more about the pledge and, maybe sign on as well, how can they learn more about it and keep
Yeah,
in
they
touch
can.
with
There's
you?
still an opportunity to sign the pledge. If you like, many people sign it. We'd love to have more people across the country. You can go to ncbp.org/pledge, or you can just Google NCBP Pledge and you will get there. You can also find all the resolutions that were passed by the ABA on the ABA website. And you can put in resolution 400 and see the pledge there. And anyone is welcome to join in and to share it and to talk about it and to sign on it and to be an advocate to protect our profession.
That's awesome, because it's not just about the agreeing, it's about the doing. We'll all do better together.
I love that.
Well, thanks again, Patrick. Thanks to all of you for watching. I really appreciate hanging out with you and hanging out with my friend Patrick and sharing these good things that he's been working on for the past year. And so for all of you, take care. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.